Hi everyone, I'm Charles Galofre, and okay, let's get started. So after e4, e5, knight f3, knight c6, bishop b5, knight f6, we reached the Berlin, and the Berlin became highly fashionable after Vladimir Kramnik defeated Garry Kasparov in his World Championship match, and so as a result, there were a lot of developments for both sides. What I'll try to do is that I'll try to show you a little bit of theory so that you can play successfully against it. So here, typically, we castle. Black captures on e4, and now the main move is d4. I'll go over rook to e1 just in case this is one of your favorite variations, or if you're curious as to how to play it, I'll go over it. So the main move is d4, after which black typically plays knight to d6, and we play bishop c6, pawn takes c6, pawn e5, and now knight f5. If knight e4, we'll go over that in a second. So after knight to f5, we play queen takes d8, king takes d8, and this is the Berlin endgame. And what could we say about this endgame? Well, John Shaw said it best. I think that this endgame, well, I don't think it. It's his interpretation. It's an endgame where it's a battle of pawn majorities. White is trying to qualitatively prove that his pawn majority is better than black's, and as a result, that ensues into an interesting struggle. Needless to say, theory does acknowledge that the endgame is better for white, and so if you like this position, I recommend that you play it. With that said, some strategical concepts that you could keep in mind. Typically, black wants to exchange a pair of knights, so you might want to avoid that because it's better for the bishops. And also, black wants to sometimes exchange this bishop for this knight because the resulting endgame is an opposite color bishop endgame where the bishop, where the white bishop is hampered by its own pawn on e5. And so as a result, it leads to a favorable position for black. So with that said, good luck playing this endgame. Now let's look at some of the alternatives that black can play. For instance, after bishop takes knight, pawn takes, knight to e4. An easy way of refuting this opening is by playing queen to e2, bishop f5, rook d1, queen c8 is the best move. And here, knight d4 leads to an advantage to white, and rook to d4 leads to an advantage to white. But I have an interesting variation here, which is to play e6 directly. The idea is the following. After queen takes, knight d4, queen g6, knight f5, queen f5, we play f3, and white is completely winning. So going back, another alternative here is bishop to c5, but white gets a clear advantage after capturing the pawn, king takes, and now playing the brilliant knight b to d2. All variations leads to white advantage. I'll show you some analysis. If knight takes f2, then we play queen c4 check, king f6, queen c5, knight d1, knight b3, and white is winning. So going back, another alternative is bishop takes f2, after which we play king to h1, knight d2, bishop d2, bishop b6, and now queen to c4, and white is winning. Why? Because if king to f8, then we play knight to g5, and the last move that black has here is knight takes c2 after we play rook takes. And white has an easy plan. He's going to play queen to c4 check. And depending on how black plays, he might play rook to e2, followed by developing the bishop and bringing the other rook to the e file. It's a concise plan. And by the time that we develop our pieces, black has probably developed them as well. But the harmony of our pieces is probably good enough to create threats to win the game. So, with that said, the last variation here, the last critical variation is pawn takes pawn, after which we play g4, threatening the bishop, bishop d6, and now knight to e5, once again threatening to win the knight. So, black has to play knight to f6, we play g5, and now if bishop h5, we capture the knight, bishop takes queen, f7 check, king e7, and now bishop g5 checkmate. So going back, if knight h5, then simply rook d7, bishop d6, knight g6, queen d7, queen h5, queen f7, and knight to f4 with a completely winning game. Okay, so let's go back and see some other alternatives. In this position, black has other moves. He could play pawn takes d4, bishop e7, or a6. Let's start off by looking at a6. If a6, then we play bishop takes c6, pawn takes c6, and now rook to e1. And after knight to f6, we play the very good move knight b to d2. The idea is to prevent a queen exchange when we capture on e5, and we're going to enter a position that's that resembles the Scotch game. Well, let's get to the position and you'll see what I'm referring to. After bishop to e7, pawn takes e5, knight d5, knight e4, castles, queen to e2, and here we're going to play c4, and we're going to have a sizable advantage. If pawn takes d4, we play rook to e1, d5, knight d4, bishop d6. This is a famous game. Knight takes e6, bishop takes h2. King h1, queen h4. Rook takes e4, pawn takes, queen d8, queen d8, knight d8, king d8, and king takes bishop, and white has a clear advantage in the endgame. The last sideline that black can play is bishop to e7, after which white typically plays queen e2, knight d6, bishop takes, pawn takes e5, knight p7, knight c3, castles, rook e1. The idea of rook e1 is to prevent d6. If d6 now, then we just simply capture and we have a better pawn structure. Knight c5, bishop e3, knight e6, and now knight to d4. This is the best way to gain an advantage for white, because the problem is that now if knight takes d4, we play bishop takes, and if c5, then bishop e3, and our plan is very simple. We're going to play rook a to d1. Our centralization is overwhelming, and that's going to lead to our advantage. We're going to play knight to d5, and if d6 or d5, we're going to capture the pawn, and we're going to have a better pawn structure. So going back, as promised, I'm going to show you the system with rook to e1, and this system should really not lead to an advantage, but there was a recent game that really caught my attention, and I think it caught everybody's attention. So the variation that I'm talking about is here after rook to e8, bishop to f4, sacrificing the pawn on d4, and the game could continue rook takes, queen takes, and knight to c3. Analysis of one of the recent games shows that the game could very quickly end if black is not careful. For instance, if g6, then now knight to d5, bishop b2, rook d1, knight e8, defending the c7 pawn, bishop g5, a beautiful sacrifice, f6, bishop c4, and after takes, king h8, knight takes knight, white is winning.